So we had a lovely gathering last night. I really appreciated getting to be with people in person. I appreciate this Zoom experience in the way that it allows people to attend who don't live here. It allows people to stay home in the dark winter nights and not have to drive. We burn less fossil fuel. And in some ways it's easier, but it's really nice to be in person. Really is nice. And so I appreciated people who came and just the circle of gratitude that we created. So whether you were there or not, I just wish you that same spirit to follow you through the week. This is, in theory, the week of gratitude. Thanksgiving is, in theory, the day of gratitude. It can be, mixed, shall we say. Not always easy. You may need to pull out your labels. This is suffering, or open your heart to it, or mercy, which I find particularly helpful applied to oneself, particularly helpful when the inner critic gets cranking, interrupts that, or human. That applies to everyone. So I want to speak tonight about kind of how compassion sort of lies between two things that can throw you off balance. So far, we've mostly been talking about what I would say is right view. It's a funny Buddhist term, but it points to the way that how you look at something and the container you hold it in matters in terms of the experience you have and the relative suffering or non-suffering that you have. So when we use a word like suffering or this is suffering, it suddenly brings about a different viewpoint inside. It creates a certain kind of unblending from whatever the situation is that could be causing reactivity, whether it's external or internal. And suddenly it's just seen for what it is. And it's seen in a way that is at least neutral and possibly even more than neutral, possibly more loving, more accepting. So that's right view. That's that shift that we practice that conjures up wisdom. So in compassion, you're really finding a place that is neither one of two imbalanced places that both begin with I, the letter I. So you think of them as two eyes, like there are two eyes in the head. There's two eyes, helps you to remember them. On the one hand, there's sort of the eye of indifference. And on the other hand, there's the eye of identification when it comes to suffering. So something comes along and we often sort of have a strategy of indifference. We don't see it, or often indifference takes the form of judgment. We just hold a judgment towards someone who is acting in ways that seem obnoxious or hard. And we don't see the suffering. We don't see their suffering. We might not even see our own suffering, where our minds are instead kind of engaged in this how things should be attitude, how they should be, and how they're not what they should be, or how I'm, afflicted by this, and or how I should be, and this, so we get deflected into these distancing kinds of stances through judgment, through entering into what the mind does around suffering. It's hard to just stay with one's feelings. And it's hard to unblend with one's feelings in order to stay with them. So just to be with feelings, you can't just be totally off to the races with whatever the feeling is bringing up. There's a way that you're also with it. There's a way that you have a presence with it. So, being indifferent is a strategy for not suffering. Judging people is a strategy for not suffering. But it is itself suffering. There's a lack of connection there. And I believe that if you investigate your experience, the lack of connection is painful. The way that you might go through your day, even in subtle ways, and not be connected, to be disconnected, a bit numb, a bit out of it. It's suffering. And often it's because you want to, keep your own suffering at arm's distance. We learn that early on, I think, or someone else's. We kind of want to, push it away, have it, and that creates a different kind of distance than presence. Presence is unblending, so in a sense, there's a little bit of different distance, but it's a connected distance. It's a connected distance. It's not a disconnection. Another way that kind of appears is, sometimes we can feel condescension and call that compassion, the unfortunate, or pity. I think it's only through really being with your own suffering that you can be with other people's suffering in a sense of equality. Like, man, we're in this together. It's not like, I'm so glad I'm not you, so here's some charity. That's not compassion. It's pity. So on the other hand, we got that one I, that which I've lumped kind of under the category of indifference, the pushing away kind of action. There's also identification, which is the kind of like grabbing onto and pulling it close in a certain way, in a certain unskillful way. I know that the research, there's actually quite a bit of research out there on these things, compassion, and it's often distinguished from empathy, which is a little weird because, the word empathy, it just comes from Greek and compassion comes from Latin, and they both kind of mean the same thing. But empathy, the word N or M in empathy, is in a sense putting in. It's like putting yourself in a certain way into the situation, whereas compassion is with. Maybe that will help you. Anyway, this is a distinction that they make in the research. It might be helpful to consider that sometimes when you're with someone, you let their fear, their grief, their confusion become yours in a way that maybe even is a little bit disabling for you and a bit enabling for them. In other words, there needs to be a sense with compassion, with genuine compassion, there's a sense of sovereignty. The being that you're with is sovereign, and you yourself in a certain way are sovereign in experience. And while your heart can resonate with someone, the Buddha talks about that way. There's this kind of, the heart trembles a little in the face of someone else's suffering. There's still not the way that you might actually climb on board, so to speak. I find this is most difficult with one's children. It's hard to be with one's children suffering without, in some way, like climbing on board. And often there's kind of the suffering of powerlessness that comes with the parental position, because you like want to help, you'd like to take it away, and you can't. And sometimes in these situations, people do unskillful things like bail their children out when they actually need to feel the consequences of their actions. Sometimes they make the situation more awful than in fact it is. Sometimes what children need is the presence of somebody who's steady, who's not so taken in by the suffering. I had an experience today of I received a card from someone, a friend, um, who whose grandson, teenage grandson, was killed not last year, this year, earlier this year, last winter. And she just said how she's doing. It's not very well, you might imagine. It's really, really difficult loss. And I felt for her. And I was also aware of kind of that edge, where I could like go to fear. I don't feel I did, but of loss that everyone is vulnerable to. And so I just kept her in my heart for a moment. I asked my wife, Kate, is there anything you think we can do? We'll probably let her know. We're thinking of her, something along those lines. We can't take the loss away, obviously. And in a certain way, there's the sense that's helpful and compassion is also the sense that this could be me. We're all vulnerable. That's the human thing. That's what we take on when we are born into this world. We take on a certain vulnerability. And out of that sense, some really beautiful actions come where people help each other out, where people show up when others are suffering. But often the thing that you can do that helps is to witness them with your heart, not witness in some just abstract way, but it matters to people. It matters to people that they're seen and that their suffering is known and that you are letting that in to yourself in some way. Be careful if you can't tolerate another person's pain. And again, I underline children are definitely in this category, where sometimes you can't bear it when they are hurt by something. I think it's kind of part of the job. You sign up for that. You sign up for a certain amount of identification as a parent. I don't know you can ever get out of it. But they nonetheless need your steadiness, your witnessing, your warm witnessing presence. So see if this can help as you kind of go through your week. I mean, the identification, I might say, also happens within. That's the like fusing with whatever's going on, totally fusing with whatever's going on. So you're just drowned in helplessness or fear or anger or whatever. I do believe that a huge part of wisdom is the ability to accompany yourself. And, you know, there are many situations in our life where that almost seems impossible to accompany ourselves. But that is in some sense what we're doing when we say this is suffering. If we're applying it to ourselves, we're actually showing up, we're actually accompanying ourselves. You know, recently a family friend died, and before he died, people were accompanying him, were there at his side. There was a certain amount to do, of course, at his side. But the biggest job, I think, was just being there. The biggest job was witnessing. And I wanted him to know he mattered to me. And we had a goodbye talk. It was nice to thank him for uh, all that he's given to me, and especially to my family. You know, my children grew up with his family, and I just felt a great deal of gratitude for that. Later in the week, couldn't talk. The conversation was over, but I could sit in his presence and meditate and be just still. And at a certain point, you know, I wasn't sure how or where he was, but he did kind of open his eyes and say, "You're meditating for me, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, yes." So in some ways, it mattered. This seems like it just cuts so close to the heart of what being human is. The way we accompany ourselves, the way we accompany each other through life, what Ram Dass calls walking each other home, seems like such a huge, huge part of life. You know, if you find yourself walking yourself home, there's not always somebody else to witness your suffering. Um, you know, I've found that there's just about everyone in life that has something, some element of suffering, if not a whole host of them, that they don't seem to be able to solve. They don't seem to be able to do the thing the ego wants them to do, is to find the solution and overcome this challenge. There's usually something. It could be a physical challenge. It could be a mental health challenge. It could be a family challenge. It could be with someone else, a situation. There's usually something. There's usually something that really calls on our strength of heart to accompany it. And that strength of heart has got to be different than the egoic kind of, I got to fix this, that so easily comes up. And, you know, it's not that that's bad if there's a solution, you know. If you're sick, go to the doctor. What if the doctor doesn't even know what's wrong with you? I had one of those syndromes for years, chronic fatigue, immune deficiency syndrome. Mostly they didn't know what to do with me. You know, I remember one doctor, this was early on in Seattle, before I even moved here. And part of the reason I'm even here is because I was sick and I needed to stop work for a couple of years, and we moved our family with very young children to live near their grandparents for some help. And this doctor, I came in and I had my long list of symptoms. There were like, I don't know, 21 symptoms or something like that, that would indicate something's wrong. And I read through them. And, what he said was, "Oh, that sounds awful. How do you live like that?" It was like, I managed to not cry. I felt like just bawling my head off in that moment, that someone had just seen me. And it was one of those healing moments that didn't actually cure anything, but I would say it was a deep healing moment. This doctor, this young doctor, let into his consciousness, into his heart, what it was like for me to be living the way I was. It very, very much moved me. It stayed with me. And he tried pretty diligently to come up with a solution within the tools that were given to him. He failed. It's sometimes that way. Sometimes that way. I didn't stop looking for solutions. I finally found some things that help. But there were years where it was a matter of accompanying myself and being skillful. I actually, I said to someone last night, um, someone who was actually in the very first class I offered in 1997, that the Dharma saved me. It saved me from despair. It offered me the ability to be present with my suffering rather than sinking into it, sinking into hopelessness. It didn't like do an end run around hopelessness. Hopelessness came up, but there was a way that the practice of presence, compassionate presence, gave me something to do with my powerlessness, my sense of stress that I have a family to provide for, children to take care of, and I was just not up for it physically. So that was a huge lesson for me in self-accompaniment. It really changed me. It changed how I am with people. It was often the case that when I said what I was experiencing to people, they would tell me all the things I should do. They would offer solutions, most of which I knew were useless. They would tell me what they do to stay healthy, as if their health were a virtue that I lacked. And I would just stay silent. It wasn't worth saying anything, even though I could feel how that was actually this in a certain way. I know people were well-meaning. I know sometimes they said things that I might eventually try. It wasn't a total wash to hear people's solutions that they offered. But I also really knew when people were letting in what I was experiencing. I knew. I could feel it. It's funny how we human beings can feel it. We can feel it when someone's heart is with us. We can feel when it's a little to the side, it's not quite there. You can feel that. And it matters. Your heart matters. Your heart really matters to people. It really matters to yourself too. Your body responds to it. Those moments where you accompany yourself when you're suffering, it has a measurable impact on your body. It has a measurable impact whether you hate your pain or you send it love. I'm not much of a science guy, but I do read a little of it. And it seems to be quite demonstrable that our interior attitude, the radiation of our heart, if I can put it that way, matters to the rest of the body. The body can feel it. The body can feel when it's being rejected, however that works. So it really does matter. You can't do that when you're fully in it, when you're just moaning and groaning. And believe me, in those years of chronic fatigue syndrome, there were moments of just collapsing into it. I couldn't muster the strength to be present. And I just, there were moments of hopelessness. But again, I feel like the Dharma saved me. It saved me in a way that allowed me to relate to it and actually make it my practice. I made it my meditation practice. I made it my mindfulness practice. I made the thing that was most revealing my powerlessness to be the thing that I open to. And I recommend this to you. It's very enlightening. And all of you perhaps have something in your life that falls in that category. As much as you may have all your other ducks in a row, there's one duck that you just can't quite get in a row, if not a dozen of those ducks that you can't quite get in a row. You can't quite get this person who's estranged from you to talk to you again or figure out even how to approach that. Or maybe you are the one who's caused this break and you just can't bring yourself to face something about that. Maybe there's a loss that just haunts you, you can't do anything about. Or some other situation. We all have them. Nobody escapes. There may be a better or worse. I would say probably my life's in relative good shape. But nonetheless, there are still these elements of something we have to accompany ourselves through. So neither just identify nor push away. Find that space, that ground in the middle to stand on where you accompany yourself.